The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Abigail O'Connor pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the barn, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other covering her mouth to stifle her panicked breathing. At 7 months pregnant and on the run, she'd never felt more alone in the harsh Colorado territory of 1878. The hayloft of Colton Hayes Ranch on the outskirts of Belmont, Colorado, had been her sanctuary for 3 days now, but the autumn nights were growing colder, and her meager supplies were dwindling. The barn door creaked open. Abigail froze, pressing herself deeper into the shadows as heavy boots thudded on the packed dirt floor below. She recognized the sound. It was the ranch owner himself. Colton Hayes was a formidable figure in Belmont, a 30-year-old rancher who kept to himself but whose reputation for fairness was well known throughout the county. "I know you're in here," his deep voice called out, not threatening but calm and steady. "Been noticing food going missing from my stores. Saw footprints too small to be mine leading in here this morning." Abigail held her breath, her heart hammering so loudly she feared he might hear it. "I don't mean you any harm," he continued, moving toward the ladder that led to the hayloft. "But it's fixing to storm tonight, and whoever you are, you'd be better off inside the house." A sudden jolt of pain shot through Abigail's abdomen, causing her to gasp audibly. She clutched her stomach as the baby kicked forcefully. The footsteps paused. "Madam, is that you up there?" Another wave of pain hit, stronger this time, forcing a whimper past her lips. She heard Colton ascend the ladder with surprising speed, and seconds later, his broad-shouldered silhouette appeared at the edge of the hayloft. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in the roof, his eyes widened at the sight of her, dirty, exhausted, and unmistakably with child. His weathered face softened immediately. "Good Lord," he whispered. "How long have you been up here?" Abigail tried to press herself back further, fear evident in her eyes. "Please," she begged, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Please don't send me away." Colton approached slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "I wouldn't dream of it, madam, especially not in your condition." He knelt a respectful distance away. "I'm Colton Hayes. This is my ranch you found yourself on." "Abigail," she whispered, reluctant to give her full name. "Abigail O'Connor. Miss O'Connor, you can't stay here in this barn. There's a storm brewing that'll bring the temperature down something fierce. You and your little one need proper shelter." He gestured to her belly. "May I help you to the house? I've got a spare room with a real bed, warm food, and a fire going." Thunder rumbled in the distance as if emphasizing his point. Abigail winced as another cramp seized her. "You're in pain," Colton observed, concern etching deeper lines around his eyes. "Please, let me help you." The sincerity in his voice broke through her defenses. With no other options and the baby's welfare to consider, Abigail gave a small nod. Relief washed over Colton's face. With gentle movements that belied his size, he helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they navigated toward the ladder. "I can't climb down," she admitted, embarrassed. "No need to worry about that." Without hesitation, Colton scooped her into his arms. She was startled by the ease with which he carried her, as if her pregnant form weighed nothing at all. "I've got you, Miss O'Connor. Hold tight." With remarkable care, he descended the ladder sideways, one careful step at a time, cradling her against his chest. The warmth of him shocked her system. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of impending rain. Colton didn't set her down, instead continuing across the yard toward the 2-story farmhouse with its welcoming porch light. "I don't want to be a burden," Abigail protested weakly. "You're no burden," he replied firmly, pushing the door open with his shoulder. "You're a woman in need, And my mama raised me better than to leave someone suffering when I have the means to help. The warmth of the house enveloped her as they entered. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of something savory simmering on the stove made her empty stomach clench painfully. Colton carried her to a comfortable chair near the fire. "Let me fetch you some water and food. Then I'll show you to a proper room where you can rest." As he moved toward the kitchen, Abigail finally allowed herself to relax slightly, the tension of days on high alert beginning to ebb from her shoulders. "Mr. Hayes," she called softly. He turned, his face half illuminated by the firelight. "Yes, Miss O'Connor." "Thank you," she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "You don't know what this means." His expression softened. "No thanks needed. You're safe now. That's what matters." As he disappeared into the kitchen, Abigail placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palms. "We might be okay," she whispered to her unborn child. "We just might be okay." What she couldn't know then was how much that moment the cowboy carrying her from hiding in the barn into the warmth of his home would alter the course of both their lives forever. Colton returned with a bowl of hearty stew and a chunk of bread still warm from the oven. "Eat slowly," he advised, setting the tray on a small table beside her. "Your stomach needs to adjust if you haven't had a proper meal in some time." The aroma made Abigail's mouth water uncontrollably. She tried to maintain her dignity, but at the first taste, a small moan of pleasure escaped her lips. The stew was rich with tender beef and vegetables, perfectly seasoned. "This is wonderful," she managed between careful bites. Colton settled into a chair opposite her, his eyes kind but watchful. "Been cooking for myself since I was 16. You learn a thing or two when you're hungry enough." As Abigail ate, Colton stoked the fire, giving her the space to collect herself. When she'd consumed half the bowl, all her contracted stomach could manage, he spoke again. "I don't mean to pry, Miss O'Connor, but I should know if there's anyone looking for you, anyone who might bring trouble to my door." Abigail set down her spoon, her appetite vanishing. "There is," she admitted. "My husband's brother, Thomas. My husband, William, died 3 months ago. Mining accident near Central City." Colton's expression darkened. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thomas believes. He claims the baby isn't William's." Her voice trembled with both anger and fear. "He says I've dishonored the O'Connor name. He wanted me to." She couldn't finish the sentence. "To get rid of the child," Colton finished grimly. Abigail nodded, tears threatening again. "When I refused, he said he'd take matters into his own hands after the birth, that he'd make sure neither of us brought shame to the family." She looked up, meeting Colton's gaze directly. "I had to run. I took what little money William and I had saved and fled. I've been traveling for weeks, but the money ran out in Belmont." Colton's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. "No man threatens a woman and child under my watch." He leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "You can stay here as long as you need, Miss O'Connor. I've got plenty of room and no one would think to look for you here." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Abigail asked, genuinely bewildered by his generosity. Colton was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the flames dancing in the fireplace. "I know what it's like to be alone and afraid," he finally said. "Lost my parents when I was young, had to make my own way. If someone had shown me kindness then." He shrugged, leaving the thought unfinished. "Besides, it's the right thing to do." A crack of thunder shook the windows, making Abigail jump. Rain began to patter against the glass, quickly intensifying to a downpour. "That storm would have been mighty uncomfortable in the barn," Colton observed, rising from his chair. "Let me show you to your room. You need rest more than anything." He helped her up the stairs to a modest but clean bedroom with a patchwork quilt spread across a sturdy bed. A small dresser and washstand completed the furnishings. "Bathrooms down the hall," he explained. "I'll bring up some hot water so you can wash up. There's a nightgown in the dresser belonged to my mother. Might be a bit big, but it's clean." "Your mother?" Abigail asked softly. A shadow crossed his face. "She passed on 10 years back. Consumption. My father followed a year later." "Broken heart," folks said. He gestured around. "Left me the ranch. Been on my own since." Before Abigail could respond, Colton excused himself to fetch the promised water. When he returned with a steaming pitcher, he set it on the washstand along with a bar of soap that smelled faintly of lavender. "I'll leave you to it," he said, heading for the door. "If you need anything at all, just call out. I'm a light sleeper." "Mr. Hayes," Abigail called as his hand touched the doorknob. When he turned, she continued, "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." His smile was gentle. "There's no debt between us, Miss O'Connor. Get some rest now. Things often look brighter in the morning." With that, he closed the door quietly behind him, leaving Abigail alone with her thoughts and the sound of rain hammering against the roof, a roof that, for tonight at least, offered her genuine security. The first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, rousing Abigail from the deepest sleep she'd experienced in months. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The soft bed beneath her was a far cry from the hay that had been her mattress for days. Then memory returned. The barn, Colton Hayes, his unexpected kindness. She placed a hand on her rounded belly, feeling the reassuring movement of her child. "Good morning to you too, little one," she whispered. After washing her face in the basin, fresh water had been left while she slept. Though she hadn't heard Colton enter the room, Abigail changed back into her dress. It was travel-worn and dirty, but she had nothing else. Downstairs, she found Colton already at work in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up as he tended to something sizzling in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," he greeted, glancing up with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Hungry?" Abigail nodded, surprising herself with her appetite. "Very." "Take a seat," he said, gesturing to the kitchen table already set with plates and utensils. "Coffee's ready if you'd like some." "I shouldn't," Abigail said, placing a protective hand on her belly. "The doctor in Central City advised against it." Colton nodded in understanding. "I've got fresh milk from the cow, or there's water, of course." "Milk would be wonderful," Abigail said, settling herself at the table. "You seem very comfortable in the kitchen, Mr. Hayes." "Colton, please," he replied, setting a glass of milk before her. "And necessity is a fine teacher. Can't run a ranch on an empty stomach." He served up a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with honey. As they ate, Colton explained the workings of his ranch, modest by Colorado standards, but self-sufficient, with a small herd of cattle, several horses, chickens, and a productive vegetable garden. "It's just me and occasionally a hired hand during busy seasons," he explained. "I prefer the quiet mostly." "It's beautiful land," Abigail observed, looking out the window at the mountains rising in the distance beyond the pastures. The storm had cleared, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. "It suits me," Colton agreed. Then, his tone turning more serious, "I was thinking about your situation, Miss O'Connor." "Abigail, please," she interrupted. "If I'm to call you Colton," he nodded. "Abigail, I was thinking that your brother-in-law might well come searching for you in Belmont if that's where you were last seen. Folk around here are friendly, but they notice strangers. Word could get back to him." Fear clutched at Abigail's heart. "You're right. I should move on. That's not what I meant," Colton said quickly. "You're in no condition to be traveling, especially with winter coming on." He hesitated. "I have a proposition, if you're willing to hear it." Abigail nodded cautiously. You need a safe place to have your baby and recover. I need help around the ranch cooking, mending, keeping accounts. I never learned my letters properly, and it's a hardship sometimes." He met her eyes directly. "I propose you stay here as my housekeeper. I'll pay you fair wages, provide room and board for you and the little one when it arrives. In exchange, you help with the domestic side of things." Abigail stared at him, stunned by the offer. But people would talk. A single woman living in a bachelor's home. Colton's expression remained steady. "Folk around here know me as a man of honor. Besides, there's a perfectly proper explanation for a widowed housekeeper. As for the child, well," he shrugged, "people can think what they want." I've never much cared for gossip. The practical part of Abigail's mind recognized the sense in his proposal. She had nowhere else to go, no money, and a baby coming within months. Yet pride made her hesitate. "I don't want charity, Colton." "It's not charity if you're working," he pointed out reasonably. "And I'd be getting the better end of the bargain. Been living like a wild man out here for years." A small smile touched his lips. "Just consider it. You don't have to decide right away." But Abigail already knew her answer. For her child's sake, she needed stability and safety. "I accept," she said quietly, "and I'm very grateful." Relief crossed Colton's face. "Good, that's good." He rose from the table, suddenly seeming slightly awkward. "I need to tend to the animals." "Make yourself at home. This is your house too now." As he headed for the door, pulling on his coat and hat, Abigail called after him. "Colton, thank you for everything." He paused, silhouetted in the doorway. "Nothing to thank me for, Abigail, just doing what's right." After he'd gone, Abigail sat alone at the kitchen table, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. Yesterday, she'd been hiding in a barn, terrified and alone. Today, she had a home, employment, and a protector. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling her baby move beneath them. "We're going to be all right," she whispered. "Mr. Hayes is a good man." What she didn't say aloud was the thought that followed, and I must be careful not to mistake kindness for something more. The weeks passed in a rhythm that brought unexpected comfort to Abigail's life. True to his word, Colton was an employer of unwavering fairness and respect. He worked from sunrise to sunset, tending his land and livestock with quiet dedication, while Abigail transformed the functional but barren house into a home. Her cooking brought color back to her cheeks and put weight on Colton's lean frame. The accounts, which had been kept in haphazard fashion in a worn ledger, now reflected precise order. Mended clothes, freshly laundered linens, and curtains that hadn't been washed in years all testified to her presence. As November yielded to December, snow blanketed the ranch in pristine white. Abigail's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing more pronounced, her movements slower but no less purposeful. Colton, observing her fatigue, insisted she rest more frequently. "The accounts can wait," he told her one evening, taking the ledger from her hands as she sat by the fire. "You're working too hard." "So says the man who breaks ice on water troughs before dawn," Abigail replied with a smile. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a friendship built on mutual respect and growing affection. They shared meals, stories of their pasts, and occasional laughter that grew less rare as Abigail's sense of security deepened. During the long winter evenings, she discovered that despite Colton's limited formal education, he possessed a quick mind and natural intelligence. She began teaching him to read better, starting with the newspaper from Belmont that arrived weekly with supplies. "My father believed reading was a waste of time for a rancher," Colton explained as they sat at the kitchen table, his finger tracing the words on the page. "Said all I needed to know was cattle, horses, and weather." "And what do you think?" Abigail asked, watching him struggle through a particularly difficult passage. His eyes met hers, surprisingly vulnerable. "I think I've missed a whole world of things by not knowing what these words say." Such moments of connection came more frequently as December deepened. One evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Abigail felt the baby kick with unusual force. She gasped, her hand flying to her side. Colton was instantly alert. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she laughed softly. "This little one is just practicing for the rodeo, I think." Without thinking, she asked, "Would you like to feel it?" The moment the words left her mouth, she realized the impropriety of the suggestion. A flush crept up her neck. "I'm sorry. I'd like that," Colton interrupted gently. "If you're sure it's all right." Hesitantly, Abigail took his hand, calloused and rough from years of ranch work, and placed it on the side of her belly where the baby was most active. For a moment, nothing happened, and she feared the child had settled. Then came a forceful kick directly against Colton's palm. His eyes widened in wonder, all traces of his usual reserve vanishing. "That's amazing," he whispered, his hand warm through the fabric of her dress. Another kick followed, and Colton laughed, a full, rich sound Abigail had rarely heard from him. "Strong little thing, isn't it? Like its father," Abigail said softly, memories of William momentarily shadowing her joy. Colton withdrew his hand, his expression becoming more guarded. "William must have been a good man to have won your heart." "He was," Abigail confirmed, her hand absently stroking her belly. "Kind and hardworking. He had such dreams for our future." She sighed. "The mine collapse took 20 men that day. William was among the last they found." "I'm sorry," Colton said simply. After a pause, he asked, "What was his brother's claim about the child not being William's?" Abigail's face hardened. "A lie. Thomas always resented that William married me, said I wasn't good enough for the O'Connor name. When William died, Thomas saw an opportunity to be rid of me and any claim William's child might have on the family property." "There's inheritance at stake," Abigail nodded. "William's grandfather left land in his will to be divided among the grandsons and their heirs. With William gone, his share would go to his child. Thomas doesn't want to share with my baby." Colton's expression darkened. "A man who'd threaten a woman and an unborn child over property isn't worthy of the name man at all." "I agree," Abigail said, meeting his gaze with quiet strength. "That's why I ran. I'll raise this child alone before I let Thomas O'Connor anywhere near us." Colton studied her face in the firelight. "You won't be alone, Abigail, not as long as you want a place here." The intensity in his voice caused her heart to skip a beat. She looked away, suddenly afraid of the emotion stirring within her. Emotions she had no right to feel as a recent widow carrying another man's child. "Thank you," she murmured. "I should rest now. Good night, Colton." As she made her way upstairs, Abigail could feel his eyes following her. The baby kicked again, as if reminding her of its presence and of all the complications that came with it. 2 weeks before Christmas, Abigail was kneading bread dough when she heard the unfamiliar sound of an approaching wagon. Visitors were rare at the Hayes ranch, especially in winter. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, her heart racing with instinctive fear. Through the frost-rimmed glass, she saw a horse-drawn wagon coming up the long drive, a single figure hunched on the seat. Colton was in the barn, too far to call without venturing outside into the bitter cold. Anxiety gripped her. Was it Thomas? Had he somehow tracked her to Belmont and beyond? The wagon drew closer, and Abigail relaxed marginally when she saw it was driven by an elderly man she didn't recognize. Still, caution made her retreat from the window. She stood in the kitchen, one hand protectively over her now prominent belly, listening as the wagon came to a stop and boots crunched in the snow. A knock at the door made her jump. She approached cautiously, calling through the wood, "Who is it?" "Doc Mitchell from Belmont," came the reply, the voice aged but strong. "Looking for Colton Hayes." Relief flooded through Abigail. She'd heard Colton mention the doctor, an old friend of his father's who occasionally visited. She opened the door to reveal a white, bearded man in his 70s, his face weather-beaten but kind. "Mr. Hayes is in the barn," she explained. "I can fetch him for you." The doctor's eyebrows rose as he took in her condition. "No need for you to go out in this cold, madam." "I can find him myself." He hesitated. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Walter Mitchell." "Abigail O'Connor," she replied, suddenly aware of how her presence must appear. "I'm Mr. Hayes' housekeeper." If the doctor thought this arrangement unusual, he gave no sign of it. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. O'Connor. May I come in while I wait for Colton? These old bones don't take to cold like they used to." Abigail stepped back, welcoming him into the warmth of the kitchen. As she poured him a cup of coffee, he observed her with professional interest. "How far along are you, if you don't mind my asking?" 8 months now," Abigail answered, one hand automatically going to the small of her back where an ache had been persistently troubling her. "You're first," she nodded. "And you're widowed, I take it?" he asked gently, noting her black dress. "Yes. My husband died in a mining accident near Central City." The doctor's eyes softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss. It's fortunate you found a position here. Colton's a good man, though he keeps to himself more than is healthy." He sipped his coffee appreciatively. "This is excellent. Colton's been living on his own, cooking too long." Before Abigail could respond, the door opened and Colton entered, bringing with him a blast of cold air and the smell of the barn. He stopped short at the sight of their visitor. "Doc Mitchell," he greeted, surprise evident in his voice. "What brings you out in this weather?" "Pneumonia over at the Wilson place," the doctor explained. "Thought I'd stop by on my way back to town. It's been some months since I've seen you." His eyes twinkled. "Though I see you've had company of your own." Colton glanced at Abigail, something protective crossing his features. "Mrs. O'Connor is my housekeeper. She's expecting her first child in January." "So she told me," the doctor replied mildly. "I'd be happy to examine her while I'm here if she'd like. Save her a trip to town." Colton looked to Abigail, letting the decision be hers. The thought of a medical examination after so many months without care was appealing. "I would appreciate that very much, doctor, thank you." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "Good. Colton, perhaps you could show me to a private room where Mrs. O'Connor and I can have our consultation." Colton led them to the parlor, rarely used but clean thanks to Abigail's careful housekeeping. As the doctor set down his bag, Colton hesitated at the door. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything," he told Abigail, his concern evident. The examination was thorough but gentle, the doctor's manner professional and kind. "The baby is in the proper position," he informed her afterward. "Strong heartbeat. You're healthy, despite the obvious hardships you've endured recently." Abigail buttoned her dress, relief washing over her. "When do you think?" "First babies often take their time," Dr. Mitchell replied, "but I'd expect sometime in mid to late January." "You're fortunate to have found such a comfortable situation here. Colton Hayes isn't known for opening his home to strangers." Abigail flushed slightly. "He's been very kind." The doctor studied her thoughtfully. "Kindness is something Colton has in abundance, though few get close enough to see it." He packed his instruments away. "I'll try to visit again before your time comes, but if I can't make it, send for me. Colton knows where I am." When they returned to the kitchen, They found Colton had prepared fresh coffee and set out the bread and preserves Abigail had made the previous week. "Everything all right?" he asked, his eyes searching Abigail's face. "Mother and child are doing well," the doctor confirmed. "You've been taking good care of your housekeeper, Colton." Something flashed in Colton's eyes, pride perhaps, or relief. "Mrs. O'Connor takes good care of herself. And of this place. It hasn't been this habitable in years." Dr. Mitchell accepted a piece of bread with blackberry preserves. "I can see that. Your mother would be pleased to see a woman's touch here again." They spoke of local matters while they ate the harsh winter. News from town, predictions for spring calving. Throughout the conversation, Abigail caught the doctor watching the interactions between herself and Colton with shrewd interest. When it came time for him to leave, the doctor pulled Colton aside for a private word on the porch. Abigail busied herself with cleaning up, trying not to speculate on what they might be discussing. When Colton returned, his expression was unreadable. "What did the doctor say about the baby?" he asked, helping her with the dishes without being asked something that had become his habit in recent weeks. "That everything looks normal," Abigail replied. "Mid to late January, he thinks." Colton nodded, seeming lost in thought. Finally, he spoke. "Doc Mitchell thinks you shouldn't be alone when your time comes. He suggested I might hire a woman from town to stay here for a few weeks around your due date." "Oh." Abigail hadn't considered this. "That's probably wise, but I wouldn't want to put you to additional expense." "Your health and the baby's safety are what matter," Colton said firmly. "I'll ride into town tomorrow and make arrangements." His concern touched her deeply. "Thank you, Colton, for everything." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his usually solemn features. "You've brought life back to this old house, Abigail. I'm the one who should be thankful." In that moment, as their eyes met across the kitchen, something shifted between them, something neither was prepared to acknowledge but both felt with increasing certainty. Christmas arrived with a heavy snowfall that transformed the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Abigail had decorated the house with pine boughs and red berries gathered from the woods at the edge of the property. The scent of cinnamon and apples filled the kitchen as she prepared a special dinner, determined to make the day memorable despite their modest circumstances. Colton had ridden into town the previous day, returning with supplies and a small package he'd hidden immediately upon arrival. As they sat down to Christmas dinner, he seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "I'm not much for celebrations," he admitted as Abigail set a perfectly roasted chicken on the table alongside potatoes, carrots, and fresh bread. "Haven't done much for Christmas since my parents passed." "Then it's high time we changed that," Abigail said warmly. "Every home should have some joy at Christmas." They ate with appreciation, the food more elaborate than their usual fare. Afterward, as they sat before the fire with cups of hot cider, Colton retrieved the package he'd hidden. "I got you something," he said, handing her the small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much, but—" Touched by the gesture, Abigail carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a beautiful carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a silver locket on a delicate chain. "Colton," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's beautiful." "Open it," he urged softly. Inside the locket was a tiny compartment, perfect for a small lock of hair or miniature portrait. "For the baby," Colton explained, "so you can keep a memento close to your heart." Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes, both from the thoughtfulness of the gift and the realization that no one, not even William, had ever understood her so well with so few words between them. "I love it," she whispered. "Thank you." "Here," he offered, taking the necklace from her trembling fingers. "Let me." Abigail turned, lifting her hair as Colton fastened the chain around her neck. His fingers were gentle against her skin, and she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the December cold. "I have something for you, too," she said when she had composed herself. From beside her chair, she retrieved a package wrapped in a piece of clean muslin tied with twine. Colton accepted it with genuine surprise. "You didn't need to, I wanted to," Abigail interrupted with a smile. "Open it." Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in a deep blue that matched his eyes, along with a pair of leather gloves she had repaired and lined with rabbit fur from one of his recent hunts. "I noticed your old gloves were worn through," she explained as he examined the gifts with wonder. "And I thought the scarf, well, the color reminded me of your eyes." The moment the words left her mouth, Abigail blushed furiously. It was too intimate an observation, too revealing of feelings she scarcely admitted to herself, but Colton seemed deeply moved. "No one's made anything for me since my mother died," he said quietly, running his fingers over the even stitches of the scarf. "Thank you, Abigail. I'll treasure these." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. Outside, snow continued to fall, isolating them in their own small world. For the first time since William's death, Abigail felt a sense of belonging, of rightness. "Merry Christmas, Colton," she said softly. "Merry Christmas, Abigail." His voice was husky with emotion neither of them was ready to name. As they sat in comfortable silence, the baby moved within her, a reminder of both her past and her future. Abigail's hand went to the locket now resting against her heart. Whatever came next, this moment, this Christmas, would remain one of her most cherished memories. January brought bitter cold and howling winds that rattled the windows of the ranch house. As Abigail's time drew nearer, Colton arranged for Mrs. Emerson, a widow from town with midwifery experience, to stay at the ranch. The older woman arrived with her valise and a no-nonsense attitude that Abigail found reassuring. "Been bringing babies into the world for 30 years, she informed Abigail as she inspected the room Colton had prepared for the birth. "Lost only 2 mothers and 3 babes in all that time, and those were troubled from the start." She patted Abigail's hand. "You're strong and healthy. You'll do fine." Having another woman in the house changed the dynamic between Abigail and Colton. They were more careful, more formal in their interactions. No more lingering conversations by the fire in the evenings, no more accidental touches as they worked together in the kitchen. Yet Abigail often caught Colton watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. Something was building between them, something neither dared to acknowledge with words. On the night of January 18th, Abigail woke to a sharp pain and the unmistakable sensation of dampness beneath her. "Mrs. Emerson," she called, trying to keep her voice steady despite her rising panic. The older woman was at her side in moments. "Your time has come, dearie," she said after a brief examination. "First babies often take their time, so settle in. We've got a long night ahead," and long it was. As the hours passed, Abigail's labor intensified. Mrs. Emerson proved her worth, offering encouragement, herbal tea for strength, and practical help as Abigail worked through each contraction. Downstairs, Colton paced anxiously, wincing at each cry that penetrated the floorboards. When Mrs. Emerson came down for fresh hot water shortly before dawn, her apron stained with evidence of her work, he accosted her immediately. "How is she?" he demanded, his face haggard from a sleepless night of worry. "Doing as well as can be expected," the midwife replied calmly. "The baby's taking its time, but that's normal for a first birth." "Is there nothing I can do?" Colton asked, frustration evident in his voice. Mrs. Emerson studied him with knowing eyes. "Pray, Mr. Hayes, and keep that water hot. She'll need it when the time comes." Another 4 hours passed before the sound they'd been waiting for filled the house, the lusty cry of a newborn taking its first breath. Colton, who had been sitting with his head in his hands at the kitchen table, leapt to his feet. Mrs. Emerson appeared at the top of the stairs, her tired face wreathed in smiles. "Mr. Hayes," she called down, "Mrs. O'Connor has a fine son. Mother and child are doing well." Relief washed over Colton so powerfully that he had to grip the banister for support. "Thank God," he whispered. "She's asking for you," the midwife added, her expression revealing nothing of what she thought about this seemingly improper request. Colton took the stairs 2 at a time. At the door to Abigail's room he paused, suddenly uncertain. Then he heard her voice, weak but joyful. "Come in, Colton. Come meet him." The scene that greeted him would stay with Colton until his dying day. Abigail, exhausted but radiant, propped up against pillows with a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. Her hair, usually neatly pinned, fell in dark waves around her shoulders. Her face was pale but triumphant. "Colton," she whispered. "Meet William Colton O'Connor." The unexpected honor of having the child partially named for him struck Colton speechless. He approached the bed carefully, as if afraid his presence might somehow disturb the perfect tableau before him. The baby was impossibly small, his face red and slightly squashed, with a shock of dark hair plastered to his head. As Colton watched, the infant's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep blue irises that would likely change with time. "He's perfect," Colton managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" Abigail asked, before he could protest that his hands were too large, too rough for such a tiny being. Mrs. Emerson had taken the baby from Abigail and placed him in Colton's arms, showing him how to support the newborn's head. The weight of the child was nothing, yet Colton felt as if he held the entire world. The baby blinked up at him, seeming to study his face with an intensity that belied his few hours of life. "Hello, little man," Colton whispered. "Welcome to the world." When he looked up, he found Abigail watching them with tears in her eyes. Something passed between them, then something profound and unspoken. Mrs. Emerson cleared her throat. "Mr. Hayes, the mother needs her rest now. You can visit again later." Reluctantly, Colton returned the baby to Abigail. Their hands touched briefly in the exchange, and he found himself unable to pull away immediately. "Thank you," Abigail said softly, "for everything." "Rest now," he replied, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture far too intimate for employer and employee. "I'll be close if you need anything." As he left the room, Colton felt changed in some fundamental way he couldn't articulate. The world seemed brighter, fuller of possibility than it had just hours before. In the weeks that followed young William's birth, the Hayes Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Mrs. Emerson stayed on for 10 days, ensuring Abigail's recovery was proceeding well and teaching her the essentials of infant care. When she departed, she left behind detailed instructions and a knowing look that made Abigail blush. "That man cares for you and the baby as if you were his own," the midwife observed as Abigail walked her to the wagon Colton had arranged to take her back to town. "I've never seen Colton Hayes so transformed." "He's been very kind," Abigail replied carefully. Mrs. Emerson snorted. "Kind doesn't begin to cover it, dearie. The way he looks at you when you're not watching would melt snow in January." With the midwife gone, Abigail and Colton established a partnership that revolved around baby William's needs while maintaining the ranch. Colton insisted Abigail reduce her housekeeping duties to focus on recovering her strength and caring for the infant. To her surprise, he proved remarkably adept with the baby, never hesitating to take William when Abigail needed rest. "Where did you learn to care for an infant?" she asked one evening as Colton walked the colicky baby around the kitchen, the tiny form almost disappearing against his broad chest. "Had a younger sister," he replied, his voice soft as he patted William's back. "She died of fever when she was 2. I was 8, but I remember helping my mother with her." Abigail's heart ached at this new revelation about his past. "I'm sorry, Colton. You've known so much loss." He shrugged, the gesture gentle so as not to disturb the now sleeping infant. "Life out here is hard. But there's joy too, if you know where to look for it." His eyes met hers across the kitchen, and the intensity there made Abigail's breath catch. More and more frequently, she found herself imagining a future she had no right to contemplate, a future where Colton was more than her employer, where William had a father figure in his life, where the three of them were truly a family. Such thoughts were dangerous, she knew. She was still in mourning, still legally bound to the memory of her husband. Yet with each passing day, her feelings for Colton grew deeper, more difficult to deny. February brought slightly warmer days and the first intimations of spring. William thrived, growing plumper and more alert. His resemblance to his father was evident in the shape of his eyes and the determined set of his tiny jaw. But Abigail sometimes fancied she saw traces of her own family in his expressions. One crisp afternoon, while William napped, Abigail decided to take advantage of the sunshine to hang laundry outside. As she worked, enjoying the fresh air after weeks mostly confined indoors, she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Shading her eyes against the sun, she watched as a rider came into view. It wasn't Colton, who was working with the cattle in the north pasture. This stranger rode with a purpose that sent a chill of apprehension through her. As the rider drew closer, Abigail's worst fears were confirmed. Thomas O'Connor's distinctive red hair and beard were unmistakable, even at a distance. How he had found her, she couldn't imagine, but here he was the threat she had fled, arriving at the very doorstep of the safety she had found. Instinct drove her back toward the house, toward William. She had just reached the porch when Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Abigail, stop right there." She turned, one hand on the door, her heart pounding. "What do you want, Thomas?" He dismounted, his face flushed with either cold or anger, perhaps both. "What do I want?" He repeated incredulously. "You disappear with my brother's child and you ask what I want, my child," Abigail corrected, standing straighter despite her fear. "William's and mine." Thomas advanced toward the porch, his expression darkening. A child that by rights should have been raised by family, not hidden away in some backwater with a stranger. "How did you find me?" Abigail demanded. A cruel smile twisted Thomas's features. "Small towns have long memories." Someone in Belmont mentioned a pregnant widow had taken up housekeeping for the Hayes ranch. Wasn't hard to put it together. His gaze flicked to the house behind her. "So where is it? The baby?" "That's none of your concern," Abigail replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It is very much my concern," Thomas shouted, mounting the porch steps. "That child carries O'Connor blood, has a claim to O'Connor property. Did you think I'd simply forget that?" Before Abigail could respond, the baby's cry sounded from inside the house. Thomas's eyes lit with a triumph that turned her blood cold. "So it lives," he said softly. "Boy or girl?" Abigail remained silent, positioning herself more firmly in front of the door. Thomas's face contorted with anger. "Move aside, Abigail. I have a right to see my brother's child." "You have no rights here," came a deep voice from behind Thomas. Colton stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his rifle held casually but unmistakably ready. Abigail hadn't heard him approach. He must have come at a run when he spotted the strange rider from the pasture. Thomas turned, measuring the newcomer with a calculating gaze. "This doesn't concern you, mister. This is family business." "You're on my property," Colton replied evenly, "threatening a woman under my protection. That makes it very much my concern." He climbed the steps slowly, positioning himself between Thomas and Abigail. "I suggest you state your purpose and then be on your way." "I've come for my nephew," Thomas stated flatly. "Abigail has no right to keep him from his father's family." "The lady seems to disagree," Colton observed. "And since she's the child's mother, I'm inclined to respect her wishes." Thomas's face reddened further. "Do you know who I am? The O'Connors have influence in this territory. One word from me, and one word from you won't mean much if you're trespassing where you're not wanted," Colton interrupted, his voice deceptively calm. "Now, I'm going to ask you once to leave peacefully. What happens next is up to you." For a long moment, tension crackled between the two men. Abigail held her breath, one hand pressed against the door behind her as if physically anchoring herself to the home where her son slept. Finally, Thomas took a step back. "This isn't over," he warned, his gaze shifting between Colton and Abigail. "That boy has O'Connor blood. He belongs with his father's people. That boy has a mother who loves him," Colton replied, "and a home here for as long as she chooses to stay." With a final glare of impotent fury, Thomas descended the steps and mounted his horse. "I'll be back," he called as he wheeled the animal around. "With papers from a judge. You haven't seen the last of me." They watched in silence as he galloped away, dust rising in his wake. Only when he had disappeared from view did Abigail's composure finally break. Her knees weakened, and she might have fallen if Colton hadn't caught her, his arm strong around her waist. "He found us," she whispered, trembling. "He knows about William." "SHH," Colton soothed, guiding her into the house where the baby's cries had increased in volume. "Let's tend to William first, then we'll figure this out." Inside, Abigail lifted her son from his cradle, holding him close as her tears fell on his downy head. "I won't let him take you," she promised the infant. "Never." Colton set his rifle aside and moved to put the kettle on, his movements deliberate and calm despite the gravity of the situation. When he had prepared tea for Abigail and ensured she was settled in the rocking chair with William nursing contentedly, he pulled up a chair across from her. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. "About Thomas, about the inheritance, about what legal claim he might have. Leave nothing out." And so Abigail did, explaining the complex family dynamics of the O'Connors, the valuable mining shares that would one day belong to William as his father's heir, and Thomas's desperate attempts to control the family fortune. "He has no legal right to William," she concluded. "But he has money and connections. If he goes to a judge with false claims about my fitness as a mother," Colton's jaw tightened. "We won't let it come to that." "We," Abigail repeated, looking up at him with vulnerable hope. He reached out, his large hand gently covering hers where it rested on William's blanket. "Yes, we. You and William aren't alone in this, Abigail. Not anymore." The promise in his words, in his touch, in his unwavering gaze, broke something open inside her, a dam of emotion she had been carefully containing since the day he found her in his barn. "I don't know what we would have done without you," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Colton's thumb brushed over her knuckles, a gesture so tender it nearly undid her completely. "You would have managed," he said with a small smile. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, but I'm glad you didn't have to." In that moment, with her son in her arms and Colton's hand steady on hers, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The next day, Colton rode into Belmont to speak with the town's only lawyer, a former judge named Harrison Montgomery. He returned with both reassurance and concern. Montgomery says Thomas has no legal claim to William without proving you an unfit mother, he reported as they sat at the kitchen table that evening, William sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby. But he also says men like Thomas O'Connor can sometimes persuade judges with their influence and money, especially in places where the law is still flexible. Abigail clutched her teacup tighter. What do we do? Colton hesitated, and she could see him weighing his words carefully. Montgomery suggested that your position here, unmarried, living under the roof of an unmarried man, could potentially be used against you. If Thomas wanted to paint you as improper, heat rushed to Abigail's face. But you've been nothing but honorable. You and I know that, Colton agreed. But appearances matter in these situations. Montgomery suggested we might consider formalizing our arrangement. Formalizing? Abigail repeated, her pulse quickening. What do you mean? Colton met her gaze directly, though she could see the tension in his jaw. Marriage, Abigail. He suggested marriage would protect both you and William from any claims of impropriety. The word hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meanings and possibilities. Marriage is a serious step, Abigail finally managed, her voice barely audible. Not something to be entered into simply for convenience. I know that. Colton's voice was steady, though his eyes revealed more emotion than she had ever seen from him. And I wouldn't suggest it if it were only about convenience or protection. But I think you know there's more between us than that. Abigail's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Colton, you don't have to answer now, he interrupted gently. Take time to think. To be sure, William is still so young and you're still grieving William Sr. I understand that. She studied his face in the lamplight, the strong lines, the honest blue eyes, the mouth that rarely smiled but when it did, transformed him completely. This man who had taken her in when she had nothing, who had helped bring her son into the world, who now offered to bind his life to hers permanently. What about you? She asked softly. You've lived alone for so long. Are you sure you want a ready-made family? Something like pain crossed his features. Abigail, I've been alone most of my life, not by choice but by circumstance, having you and William here these past months. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. It's like color returning to a world that was only shades of gray before. I didn't know how empty this house was until you filled it. Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. I don't want you to feel obligated. This isn't about obligation, Colton interrupted firmly. It's about love. The words, spoken so plainly, so honestly, stole Abigail's breath. They had circled this truth for weeks, approaching but never quite acknowledging it. I love you, Abigail, Colton continued, his voice low but unwavering. I love William as if he were my own. I want to be a husband to you and a father to him, not just on paper but in truth, if you'll have me. Abigail's tears flowed freely now. I thought it was just me, she confessed. I've been fighting these feelings, telling myself it was too soon, that it would be a betrayal of William's memory. And now, Colton asked, hope evident in his eyes. Now I know that loving you doesn't diminish what I felt for William, she said, reaching across the table to take his hand. It honors the capacity for love that he valued in me, and Colton, I do love you, so much that it frightens me sometimes. His hand tightened around hers. Is that a yes? Abigail smiled through her tears. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, Colton Hayes. The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden, brilliant, and full of promise. He rose from his chair, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. For a long moment, they simply held each other, the rightness of it settling into their bones. When he finally pulled back to look at her, his eyes were bright with emotion. May I kiss you, Abigail O'Connor? I've been wanting to for longer than I care to admit. In answer, she rose on her tiptoes, her hands coming to rest on his chest. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it deepened as months of unspoken longing found release. When they parted, both were breathless. "I never thought I'd find this again," Abigail whispered. "Never thought I'd feel joy after William died." "Life has a way of surprising us," Colton replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sometimes with hardship, sometimes with blessings we never expected." As if on cue, William stirred in his basket, giving a small cry that quickly escalated to a demanding wail. They laughed, the intimate moment broken but not diminished. "Speaking of surprises," Abigail said with a smile as she moved to pick up her son. Colton watched her with the baby, his expression soft with love for both of them. "We'll be married as soon as possible," he said, "before Thomas can make good on his threats." Abigail nodded, her practical nature reasserting itself. And then, Colton said with quiet confidence, "we build our life together. The three of us. A family." The word resonated in Abigail's heart like a bell, clear and true. Family, something she had feared lost forever, was now being offered to her anew, unexpected and precious beyond measure. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Belmont, with Dr. Mitchell and lawyer Montgomery as witnesses and Mrs. Emerson holding baby William. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, each word of the vows spoken with sincere intention. As winter gave way to spring, new life emerged across the ranch. Calves were born, fields turned green, and the Hayes family settled into their shared future. Thomas O'Connor made one more attempt to claim his nephew, arriving with papers he claimed gave him guardianship rights. But faced with Abigail and Colton's legal marriage, William's obvious health and happiness, and the united support of the Belmont community, his case crumbled before it could begin. "This isn't over," he threatened as he left the lawyer's office, defeated but still defiant. "Yes, it is," Colton replied evenly, his arm protective around Abigail's shoulders. "William has a family who loves him. That's all that matters now." As they walked home that day, Abigail carrying their son while Colton led the horses, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here from fear and desperation in a hayloft to love and security in a family of her own making. "What are you thinking about?" Colton asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Abigail smiled, shifting William to her other arm. "About that night you found me in the barn, how terrified I was, how sure I was that you'd turn us away." Colton's gaze softened. "I knew the moment I saw you that you belonged inside, not hiding in that cold barn. I just didn't realize then that you belonged with me. And now," he stopped walking, turning to face her fully, "now I can't imagine this ranch or my life without you and William in it. You're my heart, Abigail Hayes, both of you." The sound of her new name still sent a thrill through her. Abigail Hayes, wife, mother, beloved. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying all the complex emotion of their journey together. Colton leaned down to kiss her, gentle but sure, right there on the road with the spring sun warming their faces and their son nestled between them. When they parted, his smile held all the promise of their future. "Let's go home," he said, taking her free hand in his. Home. Not just a place, but a feeling, a belonging. As they continued down the road toward their ranch now, truly Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, spring 1884, the spring afternoon was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers, and the sound of children's laughter floating across the ranch yard. Abigail Hayes stood on the porch of the now expanded farmhouse, one hand resting on her again swollen belly as she watched her husband chase their children around the oak tree. 5-year-old William ran with the confidence of a boy who knew every inch of the ranch as his playground, his dark hair so like his birth father's flying wild in the wind. Close behind was 3-year-old Emma, her blonde curls and blue eyes a mirror image of Colton, her determination to keep up with her big brother evident in every stubborn step. "Papa, catch me," Emma squealed, dodging behind the water trough. Colton, who could break wild horses and face down armed men without flinching, played the role of the bumbling pursuer to perfection, always nearly catching his children but somehow letting them slip away at the last moment. "Too quick for me," he called, pretending to stumble as William darted between his legs. Abigail laughed, the sound drawing Colton's attention. He looked up at her, love and contentment evident in his face, the same expression she'd seen every day for 5 years, yet it never failed to warm her heart. "Mama's laughing at you, Papa," William observed, bouncing with energy. "Is she now?" Colton replied with exaggerated indignation. "Well, we'll have to do something about that, won't we?" In a swift movement that belied his earlier pretend clumsiness, he scooped up both children, one under each arm, and carried them, shrieking with delight, toward the porch. "What do you think, deputies?" he asked conspiratorially. "Should we tickle Mama for laughing at us?" "No," Abigail protested, backing toward the door. 3 against 1 isn't fair." "Life isn't fair, Mrs. Hayes," Colton replied with a wink as he set the children down. They immediately flanked him like tiny enforcers, matching mischievous grins on their faces. Abigail raised her hands in surrender, laughing. "At least spare your little brother or sister," she said, patting her 6-month pregnant belly. "This one's innocent." Colton's expression softened, as it always did at the mention of their expected child. He came up the porch steps and pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her condition. "Never fear," he murmured against her hair. "I'll always protect you and our children." "Papa, are you going to kiss Mama again?" William asked with the long-suffering tone of a child who had witnessed this behavior far too often. "Yes, son, I believe I am," Colton replied solemnly. Emma giggled. "Kissing is yucky." "You won't always think so," Abigail said with a smile, leaning into her husband's embrace. Colton kissed her softly, then turned to the children. "Now, who wants to help me check on the new foal before supper?" Me, came the enthusiastic chorus. "Go with your father," Abigail said, watching as Colton took each child by the hand. "I'll finish cooking." As the 3 of them headed toward the barn, William chattering about what he'd name the foal if it were his, and Emma insisting she should get to choose, because she was the prettiest. Abigail felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. From that desperate night in Colton's barn to this moment of domestic bliss, their journey had been one of unexpected blessings. William, who called Colton Papa with complete love and trust, had no memory of the turmoil surrounding his birth. Thomas O'Connor had eventually abandoned his pursuit, more concerned with gold strikes in Alaska than family legacy. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, expanding to include more cattle and better horses. And through it all, Abigail and Colton's love had only deepened, tempered by challenges, strengthened by shared joys, and renewed each day in countless small moments of connection. Inside the house, as Abigail stirred the stew and checked the bread baking in the oven, she found herself reflecting on how life's hardest moments sometimes led to its greatest gifts. If she hadn't fled Thomas's threats, if she hadn't hidden in that barn on that cold autumn night, if Colton hadn't insisted on bringing her inside where she belonged. The thought was too enormous to contemplate. All the happiness of her present life hung on those moments of seeming misfortune. By the time Colton and the children returned, faces flushed with excitement and fresh air. Abigail had set the table and arranged flowers from her garden as a centerpiece. As they washed up and took their places, the baby gave a forceful kick. "Oh!" Abigail exclaimed, pressing her hand to the spot. Colton was instantly attentive. "Everything all right?" she smiled, taking his hand and placing it where the baby was most active. "Perfect. This one's going to be a dancer, I think. Or maybe a blacksmith with kicks that strong." The wonder on Colton's face as he felt the movement never diminished, no matter how many times he experienced it. "Strong like their mama," he said softly. As they joined hands for grace, Abigail looked around the table at her family, at William, her firstborn, a living connection to her first love, at Emma, the physical embodiment of her love for Colton, at her husband, whose steadfast heart had made room for a desperate woman and her unborn child that fateful night. "Thank you, Lord, for this food and for the hands that prepared it," Colton prayed, his deep voice filling the kitchen. "Thank you for our children, for the blessing of this land, and for bringing Abigail into my life. Amen." "Amen," echoed the children. "Amen," Abigail whispered, squeezing Colton's hand across the table. Later that night, after the children were asleep, and the house was quiet save for the ticking of the grandfather clock Colton had surprised her with on their 3rd anniversary, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge above the Colorado mountains. "Happy?" Colton asked, his arm around her shoulders, his free hand resting gently on her belly. Abigail leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and leather and home. "Completely," she replied. "You, more than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes I still can't believe my good fortune that I found you hiding in my barn that night. That you brought me inside where I belonged," Abigail finished softly. "Where you've belonged ever since," Colton agreed, "and always will." As the night deepened around them and the baby moved beneath their joined hands, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just shelter, but her true home in this place, in this man's arms, in the family they had built together through love, courage, and the simple human act of opening a door to someone in need.